Warning, this podcast contains language that might not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. All right, guys. So, In the Bushes, episode
14.
14, I believe. Dezi
Let's
Abeta.
go.
Thanks for joining us, Dezi. For those of you that don't know, Desi's somebody I met with my time with the Milwaukee Brewers. He was our team nutritionist while I was rehabbing my ACL. He was a big part of why I was able to come back at a faster timeline than a lot of guys, and really fortunate to have him and to know him. So, Desi, thank you for joining us, dude.
Dude, I'm enjoying rekindling a lot of these relationships that I had with a lot of the athletes and friends that became really good friends.
Sure.
And Bobby, I gotta say, man, you are one of those guys. When you reached out a couple weeks ago, I was
Hmm.
like, bro, I've thought about you often because it's like I wonder how that motherfucker's doing. Like he's a good ass dude. Like I need to hit up Bobby.
Yeah, well, I
But
appreciate it,
I
man.
didn't I didn't know what you were up to, so I didn't know if you were gonna big league me and be like, "Who's
Come
this?"
on, bro. Don't do that. I wouldn't do that to you.
I
I
know, I
hit
know,
you up, I think. So yeah,
I know. You
that's
did.
awesome, man. Well, no, it's fantastic to have you on. You're the host of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. Just kind of talk about transitioning, I guess, into that role and getting into that realm. I know a lot of people. It's great to have people like yourself that are dedicated
Yeah.
to athlete performance that are spreading the knowledge to everybody that you can listen to for free on YouTube. So
Yeah.
what do you got on that, and how's that process been?
Uh, it's honestly been a like overcoming imposter syndrome type project,
Sure.
and I would assume that most podcasters or anyone who's really putting themselves out there in the entrepreneurship space, like I'm sure everyone has that same feeling, which is why I created the podcast. But even going back to like when I left Major League Baseball, I mean, I had a really frank conversation with, at the time, you know him, the head strength and conditioning coach, where he was like, "Hey, we love you, but like, let's not get it twisted. Like, we're a Major League Baseball team. We'll find someone else." And so I think even just that message, I
Yeah.
was like, "All right, cool. I'm gonna go out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna bet on myself," which caused me to not only create my business, but also to start this podcast, which for me, like I said, it's been a really big gift towards the imposter syndrome because I bought courses and downloaded so many PDFs on like how to create a podcast. And then finally, after like 3 years of researching on my birthday, actually, I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to give myself the biggest gift. I'm going to take some messy action here and just see what happens. And so
Sure.
the podcast itself has actually taken on an evolution. It started off as the Men of Purpose podcast. I really just wanted to talk to dads and to help them to hone in on habits that are aligned with them. And as it started to continue to take that evolution, I was like, you know what? Like, I'm kind of at a place right now where career's taken off. I'm killing it as a parent. I'm killing it as a husband. Like, I'm just where I thought I wouldn't be coming from my background and upbringing. And so the term, can't believe I made it came up. And I was like, you know what? A lot of the people that I'm talking with are kind of in that same space of
Sure.
like, damn, like, it's been a process, but I can't believe I made it. So right now, the podcast itself, it's for athlete entrepreneurs tapping into what makes them tick, tapping into the habits and rituals that allow them to go out and to be their best selves. And so it's really been, 140 episodes in, it's really been a really cool opportunity to not only tap into their stories, but also their hero's journey. And I
Right.
think that's one big piece that I've really loved. And I'm having a lot of fun with it, man.
No, it sounds like it, dude.
It's been dope.
That's awesome. Well, you kind of brought up imposter syndrome. That's something actually I talked to one of our guys about the other day. Um, so many guys are going through that. And
Hmm.
when you bring it up and people don't even know what it means, but then you start talking about it, it's like, oh yeah, I have that too. I think
Yeah,
that's a very
yeah.
common thing to happen, especially in a professional athlete. You get to a level where you've thought about being for, your whole entire life. You grow up as
Yeah,
a 5-year-old, you want to play in the NFL or MLB or NBA or whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, we're here. No, this can't be real.
yeah.
So I think it's a very common thing for guys to go through. And it's something that, you start to realize and talk about it. I think it makes that process of understanding, hey, I belong here a little bit better or a little easier. So,
You know what's crazy, and I don't know how you feel about this, but like I'm hoping that as these like ulterior different training modalities are getting into professional sports, that
Hmm.
we're actually holding space for the vulnerability um, of like what it means to be a professional athlete. Because
Sure.
the thing that I really, Bobby, the thing that I really loved about becoming friends with you and working with guys like you is that we're all coming from a certain background. And getting to where you've gotten is a very personal endeavor,
Sure.
which is why, like yourself, like you're willing to go through almost a year-long rehab of continuing to show up. And I think that piece right there is super special that I don't think is talked about enough. And maybe you might talk about it with your sports psychologist and things like that, but like amongst like athlete brotherhood and sisterhood, like how much are we talking about how vulnerable of an experience is it to put yourself out there? And even if you're on that sort of phase in life where you're stepping into the next phase, if you will,
Hmm.
like no one's talking about that piece because that piece in itself is still a vulnerable experience, man.
Right.
So I love that we're talking about this right now because
Yeah.
it's something that is super evident with anyone that is tapping into that next phase in their life.
No doubt. And there's something I actually listened to a before every game I would listen to like an audio guy. I think it was called Lucid. It was back in like 2017. It started. I think it's gone through a
Hmm.
different couple different names, but one of the main messages was victory to the vulnerable, which I thought
Mm,
was really really cool. Just because at the end of the day, if you're like I said, any athlete that there is, right, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable state, right? Especially at the
yeah,
highest levels when millions of people are watching you. You know,
yeah,
you're putting yourself out there to either be criticized, to be praised, or whatever it may be, and
yeah.
sometimes, a lot of the times, it doesn't go your way, and you have to be okay with that.
Dude, I mean, Bobby, that in itself, like people want the praise, but they don't want the criticism.
Yeah,
And I think that piece right there is so huge. You can't have the praise without encountering criticism.
right.
That it comes in a package fucking deal.
Yes, exactly. So like there's no good without the bad, and no bad without the good. So it's
100%.
you have to be okay with that and to be aware of that. I think to be 100% bought into whatever profession you're in, you have to be okay with failure. You have to be.
Yeah,
And if you're not, this probably isn't the
same for
right.
you.
Exactly, exactly. And that kind of brings me up into something that I did some research, watched some of your
Oh,
shows. Obviously, you had some good guests on Ben Mendelsohn, who I know, and Teresa, and
hey,
I think I
yeah.
saw Tucker Newhouse on there as well, who I haven't
Tuck
talked
was
to
on
in a
there.
while,
Tuck was
but
on there. Yeah,
that's great,
yeah.
man. So one of the things that I picked up on that I really liked was your rituals for resilience. I
Hmm.
think that was a kind of a common theme in some of your episodes there, and I don't know if that was an every Friday thing that you did, but
Yep.
what are
Yeah.
some of the better ones that you've found? What are some that work the best, or you with your clients that they like kind of they're huge fans of? What do you got on that?
Yeah. Yeah, man, I think probably the biggest thing, and I had shared this in one of the episodes, like here are the top three things that I'm finding that elite level athletes
Hmm.
and entrepreneurs are doing just from my optics.
Sure.
And so the first one is they have some sort of gratitude practice. And I had just brought up one of the resources that I've used when someone's getting into that gratitude practice, which is the 5 minute journal. Big shout out to Intelligent Change. If you want to sponsor this podcast, please go ahead and do so. but uh,
No
but
plugs.
the yeah, the 5 minute journal I think is so helpful because oftentimes when I'm encountering an athlete and an entrepreneur, and I like to use them synonymously because you do have to have a very, very gritty mindset to do both.
Sure.
Just like we're talking about, you have to be okay with the criticism in order to get to the praise. And so oftentimes there's this all or nothing thinking.
Right.
There's I performed well or I didn't, and it tends to ruin the athlete's day in this case.
Hmm.
And I think what is incredibly influential is bringing in the gray area because the only way that we get over the all or nothing thinking is truly to be thinking about, okay, all of these other things might exist. Like I'm winning, I'm losing, and how am I getting better? And that brings in that 1% like move the needle type of
Sure.
mindset shifts. And I think that piece right there is a massive one. I think the other things that I mentioned too is, and you and I worked on this when we were doing our rehab together, is discussing the power of sleep and sleep
Yeah.
hygiene.
Yep. We're gonna talk
And so
about that a lot today.
exactly. I love it. So like the sleep hygiene piece, and I won't go too much into it if we want to talk about it here in a little bit.
Hmm.
But I think the sleep hygiene piece is so huge because it's the foundation to anything that you're doing, whether you're in sport or whether you're in business. Like it helps to lay the foundation. So I would say there, and I think the other piece here is breath work, like
Yeah,
having some sort of breath work practice because any one of those three things are bringing you back into the present moment. And that's where, Bobby, you know this, like that's where the winning happens is
sure.
truly being in that present moment into your body and being okay with whatever the output is, because
Hmm.
in that moment, like that's your progression. So I would say out of all the episodes that I've done, like that one probably comes to mind because it gives you tactical advice of what you could be exploring from the standpoint of relationships with your rituals.
Yeah. No, and that's perfect, man. I wanted to sleep hygiene, okay? Like you talked about it. People don't think necessarily as sleep as like a hygienic act, right? They think
No.
of it as more of a, okay, I got home from work, I'm gonna watch a couple of shows, let me maybe
Sleep
eat
when I'm
dinner,
dead.
and I'm gonna go to sleep and I'll wake up at
Yeah.
7, and if I get 5 hours, great. If I get 10, that's fine too, So when you say sleep hygiene, what exactly do you mean?
So to your point, like we have physical hygiene, right? Like
Hmm.
all of us should be taking showers and
Sure.
washing our hands and like, not being dirty people, right? So,
Hopefully.
hopefully,
Yeah.
so I like to look at sleep hygiene as a way to almost cleanse the brain
Okay.
and to cleanse the thought processes because like most people try to like overcomplicate it, especially us like scientific individuals. Like they're
Yeah.
like, hey, you have to get so many REM cycles and all this bullshit. But like I think it has to point back to, and this is the same way I address nutrition and the same way that I would
Hmm.
address working with a strength coach of programming, where it's like, let's get the basics. How can we help you to create regularity? How can we help you to get into a consistent measure of can you go to bed at the same time? Can you wake up at the same time?
Sure.
Because from there, then we can work on duration. Then we can work on rituals before. We can work on rituals as you wake up. But I think it points back to regularity. Because if you can create regularity, then that's going to tap into your decision making, your reaction timing, um, how you encounter stress, your relationship with stress, your relationship with feelings. And I think there's so much about it that
Hmm.
they're still studying that I'm enjoying diving into a little bit more and more. So I think that piece right there, Bobby, is like let's point it back to the consistent basics. Can I get you to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time? And then we can start building on some of those habits.
Yeah, no, that's great. Because there's so many high school kids that will come in and train, or college kids, and shoot, minor league, major league baseball players, right? It's so hard to get on those sleep schedules. So for somebody like that, like say for a high school kid, they're getting up at 6 a.m. during the week to get to school, and then hey, we're not going to bed till 3 a.m. on the weekends because I want to go party or want to play video games, the minor league or bus rides. And we'll kind of touch on that from a diet standpoint here in a little bit.
Yeah.
What would you tell those guys? How could you, because it's hard, especially from a baseball perspective. If you're, let's say you have 2 night games in a row, you don't get home till 1 o'clock, you had extra innings, 1 o'clock in the morning, you had extra innings that day. Boom, we have a day game the next day, and you
Yeah.
still have to unwind. The adrenaline's still pumping. You're not going to bed till 3, but then we got to be up at 7:30 to be at stretch at
Yeah.
8:30 or 9. How
Yeah.
do you work around that? It's hard.
It is hard. There's two things that I would love to address because this just came up in one of my social feeds, and I was like, shit, this is exactly. I mean, I'm a parent, entrepreneur, dietitian.
Yeah.
But this concept of like reverse procrastination, like you're locked in like throughout the whole day, and
Hmm.
you're going, 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 and then by the time you're going to bed, it's like, well, this is my me time.
Yeah.
This is when I want to watch like 3 episodes of whatever. I want to
Right.
scroll on my phone until 11 or 12. Like this is my me time. But I think joking aside, we do need to address that if your overall goal is to perform better, to show up better, then the details matter.
Hmm.
And so even just with some of those one-off things, like I remember doing different team visits, across the different levels and seeing those guys' schedules, and I was like, okay, the schedule is shit. Like if we want them to perform better, like we need to address this.
Yeah.
But this is much more of a systemic thing, so maybe I don't have say on that. But
Yeah.
from helping the guy and athlete to understand like how they can create better sleep hygiene over time, we do want to address their sleep debt, right? Because let's say you do have one of those double headers, if you will, where you have a nighttime game and then a game right in the morning, like that's going to create some sleep debt.
Sure.
And we know that the term debt is like never a good thing, right? And
You don't
so
want that.
the way that we don't love that. The way that we try to etch away at that is making sure that we're consistent. So yeah, you know what? Maybe one or two nights you have one of those just weird schedules. But the other days, this is your opportunity where you can make sure that you get back to consistency. And I said this to you, Bobby, and I say this to any athlete that I'm working with. Don't be afraid of naps. Naps are going to be your best friend.
Hmm.
Like nap your ass off and try to regain some of that debt that you created with the crazy schedule that you had. So I think those are good places to start. Again, it's not a perfect system, but the details matter, and this is kind of
Right.
that 1% thing that you continue to work on.
No, that's fantastic. And I think, when I was with the Dodgers, they were big on naps. Just from
I
a
love
sleep
it.
performance standpoint, they'd had a little nap room, turn off the lights, and try to get
Really?
at least 30 minutes. So it's
Come on
huge.
now. I
And
love
then
it.
it kind of brings me up to my next point. I like to have some wearable tech, my Apple Watch, Aura Ring, that type of thing. And the Aura Ring for me really kind of it'll let you know the power of naps. I don't nap very often. I don't really have a lot of time to take a nap. But when I do, it's like my recovery goes up a good bit, or my sleep score does. So, what do you got on wearable tech?
I'm
For guys,
I'm so glad.
you
I'm
okay?
so glad. I'm so glad we're talking about
Yeah,
this.
let's do it. What do you got?
Uh, okay, so a play on the Rituals for Resilience series. So like back to the podcast, I'll have, which I'm going to have you on really excited about. I'll have guest interviews and then I'll have 15-minute episodes where it's digestible things to kind of teach you the tactics, right?
Sure,
So I just came across a study and I started the podcast with, okay, this isn't my favorite thing to do, but I just want to let you all know as a pod family and pod listeners, like I was wrong. I love sleep wearables. I love any sort of wearables that give you data because I'm very data driven because to
sure.
me, the data doesn't lie.
Hmm.
In this case, the data actually does. It's
Okay,
very limited. So the Aura Ring was actually one of the top tier. And generally when people are like, this is just going back to like just athletes, just like let's say with the Apple Watch or something like that, it's not very accurate at measuring calorie expenditure, right? The
okay,
calories that's our output. And so what we found even with the sleep wearables is that they were telling people that they were in certain stages of REM, different stages of sleep, and they're not that accurate. But what they are accurate at is helping to create regularity, going back to that the basics of what I was talking about, right? Of
sure.
like, hey, can you help the person go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time? But what I think is really relative to this case, and this kind of goes back to like the reward system of how the human body works and how psychology works, those little like digital notches are like, hey, you've recovered X amount, or like, congratulations. Like, those are really great dopamine hits. And so to
Yeah,
us, the reward system comes back. We're like, you know what? I know that this is a digital badge, but like, it's a badge
I
that
worked
told
my
me that I
ass off
did
to go to
well.
sleep.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to
Yeah,
this. So I think with the wearables, like, granted, they're limited. I don't think that they should be the end all be all. At the same time, though, like there are some really great positives. So, like with the Aura Ring, I think it really does a fantastic job of not only teaching you the science of what is going on, but it also teaches you the how. So
hmm,
maybe it's not incredibly accurate at tracking the sleep stages, but maybe what it does, and this is what I love about a lot of the wearables out there, it takes you into the science. Like there's a teaching component of like, hey, here's what you're working for. This is how you get there. And I think especially as dietitians and other health professionals and fitness professionals, like with this resurgence of AI and technology, like we should be embracing it
yeah,
because if you don't know how to use it and how to optimize it for the person that you're working with, people are always going to need that human touch. They're always going to need that accountability in order for them to take action on the things that you're helping them to do. But we're in a really cool time right now, man. I'm excited to be a pioneer of it, if you
yeah.
will.
So what, for somebody that maybe is looking to get into tech, wearable technology, something that tracks sleep, what have you found to be the best? What are they all kind of about the same when it comes to where they're measuring the sleep cycles at?
They Most of them don't do a great job, and so like the study that I had came across looked at like the top tier ones, and I think I mean, it really depends on how much money and how much time you want to invest.
Yeah.
But they did find that the Aura Ring was one of the top ones, which I think is pretty consistent with what I'm
Popularity and
finding with, yeah.
yeah.
So like the Aura Ring or even just the Whoop, like
Yeah.
those are really great tools that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
But like I like to use with my clients Sleep Cycle, which is an app. It's like $35 a year, but it helps to engage metrics around sleep quality, and it's really just hones it back to the regularity piece. So what's really great about it, and this is kind of where you can take a look at the health or the sleep wearable, is you can look at your metrics over time. So I think one of my favorite things is like what time are you going to bed, what time are you waking up?
Yeah.
And it also takes some of the active lifestyle factors of like, hey, did you drink caffeine today?
Yep.
You drink alcohol today? Did you get sunlight? So like it looks at some of those activity factors and like how you spent your day.
Sure.
Because the way that you maximize your sleep is not just like when you're in the bed, but it's what you're doing throughout the day is that's going to help you. So going back to your question, like the Whoop and the Aura Ring were the two that probably scored the best towards accuracy. But
Okay.
again, the accuracy is pretty limited. So I would go back to what do you enjoy using and can you create regularity and then go from there.
Oh, no, I love it. I think, even kind of back in what I was talking about earlier, me not playing anymore, my regularity from a sleep perspective has been so much better. Uh,
I bet you it's great
yeah,
now.
it is a completely different life, which, I've been enjoying from that standpoint. So, and something that I used a lot, and I think you already probably know what I'm going to going towards here is melatonin.
Yeah.
So many people they talk about it. There's, oh, it does this for you, or it's not good for you. What is your stance on melatonin? Is there an age that guys should maybe start taking it? Just avoid it completely. Like, what's your stance?
You probably know where I'm gonna go with this just because you and I have had plenty of supplement conversations, but
There's more to be had today.
there's
Just
more
so
to be
oh
had,
yeah,
right? But look, I'm gonna address this in the same way that I address supplements. So from a supplementation standpoint, it's meant to supplement an already balanced diet. So I usually tell athletes and people that I'm working with, like, you can't out supplement a really imbalanced diet and really shitty habits. It's just not how it works.
sure,
However, if you have all the ground level and foundational things happening, there's definitely some supplements that have been shown to be incredibly helpful. Now, as it pertains to melatonin, I would still look at that as a supplement because your body creates a natural amount of
sure. It's a
melatonin.
hormone, right? Or
It's a hormone. So
yeah,
like this is kind of where if you are taking something to induce the release of that hormone over time, there could be some implications, right? You could get to a point behaviorally where you're like, I need this.
yeah,
And so that's kind of where for me, I'm like, hey, before we start taking it, because there's definitely times that you can take it if you're traveling, if you had a couple bad nights of sleep and you really need to get to sleep, like in short term measurements, it's been shown to be effective. And really, the people that I've worked with have said the same thing. Like it's been really helpful for a couple days and then I get off of it type of thing.
hmm,
But I think it goes back to what I was talking about, Bobby, earlier, where it's like, hey, how are you spending your day? Right. I usually have a lot of the athletes and people that I'm working with, like, hey, in the first hour of the day, how can we help you to get some sunlight? How can we help you to move your
right,
body? How can we help you throughout the day to make sure that you're maximizing your nutrition by adequate protein, quality carbohydrates, fats, like all the micronutrients, like the color on your plate, like things I used to tell you all the
yeah,
time,
right, right,
right?
right,
What are you doing there? What are you doing for stress relief? Your caffeine intake, where are you at on a day-to-day basis? So it's really helping people to understand their rituals. And so what I like to do is we'll kind of measure out what's the first hour of your day look like? How are we maximizing our sleep tonight? And then the last hour of your day, same thing. Like, hey, can we shut off screens? Hey, if you're hungry, can we make it a bit more on the side of a higher protein meal?
hmm,
Or if you have a training session in the morning, like, hey, let's bring in some carbohydrates, right? So like
right.
it's some like different little things here and there. Um, but again, we're looking at helping people to create awareness around the habits that are killing their sleep in this case. So like if you're someone who has a nightcap before bed, like, hey, let's address an alcohol curfew. And
Hmm.
at the same time, let's address a caffeine curfew. Like, let's like help you to maximize your potential here by not like shitting on yourself by things that you're doing that are actually killing your sleep.
No, I love it, man. That's all fantastic stuff. And I think, just from having, and something that I really liked that you said was the curfew aspect. Putting
Yeah.
some sort of
Yeah.
limitation on yourself is really good, not only for, not getting not relying on a substance,
Yeah.
but also just in
Exactly.
daily life to say, okay, I'm going to go do this. Like it affects, okay, I'm going to make 30 minutes a day. I'm going to go work out. The
Hmm.
discipline aspect of that is so huge that people don't
It is.
understand. And that's just going to create mental toughness, which is going to allow for better habits and all of that. So I love it, man. I think
Really.
you're saying a lot of great stuff. Kind of going off melatonin a little bit. I saw something, and I could be completely wrong here, but it has some effects on HRV. I know HRV is a really big factor and a big data point that a lot of organizations use to measure just athletes' recovery and readiness.
Yeah.
So, what are your stances on HRV? I know it's it's a it's a variable for everybody, right? Everyone's going
Yeah.
to have a different HRV. Uh, what are your takes on that, and how do you measure it with your athletes?
Um, I really personally love it because it's kind of like a gamification of your recovery.
Okay,
And even just with what we were talking about, like throughout the day and your sleep, it kind of gives you like a gamification metric, if you will,
sure.
of like, hey, are you doing what you need to do? However, there absolutely are some variables, right? And there are some limitations to some of the data. And what I tend to find is like the really great coaches use it as a metric and a data point to work with some of the other modalities to be like, hey, how can we improve their recovery? And
Sure.
I'm mainly kind of talking on strength coaches. And I consider myself extremely thankful and I have a lot of gratitude because the strength coaches that I've worked with understand that it is a metric and understand that it is a process and it does need to be more of like a teamwork type of thing. So I've also heard of others that really value the data and kind of like shame the athlete into like getting better, which I think that's another conversation in itself. But
Yeah.
to answer your question, like I do think I love the gamification piece. I think that if you can help and educate the athlete on how to make this a bit more of a game of, hey, compared to a night where, you stayed up playing video games all night, this is what your HRV data looked like in the morning, like versus the night that you, okay, like maybe a video game curfew, like, all right, you shut the screens down around 8 and you actually went for a walk, maybe read a book, and then went to bed. Like, this is what your HRV data looks like
Yeah.
after a hard training session. Like, it becomes a game. And I think that if we can create images for people, again, going back to those like digital badges, we can give people those digital badges of like, hey, today is a perfect day. Let's maximize your potential by recreating this.
Hmm.
You're going to find, again, going back into the human psychology, you're going to find there's a little bit of a dopamine hit of like, oh, great, I got a high five. I got a pat on the butt. Like,
I did
do
it.
this again. Yeah.
No, it's
So, like I
it's
said, I love it. It's kind of a gamification piece. But again, like I'm data centric when it comes to that. Like I
mhm.
like to utilize it to like give those small little badges of like this day, yeah, do this again versus this other day. Like, hey, what was going on here? Like asking more questions, bringing
Right.
up a better discussion.
No, that's fantastic. I think, for just the normal person, right? Like what are some of those common lifestyle things that you tend to find are very prevalent for guys? Not necessarily just for athletes, but I know you said you work with a lot of just dads.
Yeah,
What are some
yeah.
things that are you found to be almost absolute when it comes to just being a human that we can improve on?
Listen, I think we talked about this at the beginning, but I think we need to talk about it more and more because it's on the topic of what I'm about to say. But um, exploring different opportunities to be vulnerable. I find that the guys that I'm working with that are maximizing their potential are also the guys that have the healthiest forms of connection.
Okay.
So this goes back to your relationship. So, in the case of a parent or in the case of someone who is in a relationship or even just has a core group of friends, like, are you around people that are not only going to push you, but also are going to hold space for all the areas that maybe you're not really proud of? And so I think it goes back to Bobby, like, is the person socially connected
Mm-hmm.
in a way where they're surrounding themselves with people who are going to push them? Like that's one piece. The other piece that I think that we're looking at is again going back to like, do they see failure as opportunities versus failure as I'm not going to do this again? Because I
Yeah.
think if we look at our habits and our rituals from the standpoint of seeing them as kind of a guidebook of what's aligned with me versus what's not, we can go back to like kind of the gamification piece. If you have a day where, you know, you woke up, you were passionate about what you're doing, you have social connection up the wazoo, you're able to perform athletically, you're able to perform in business, and then you go to bed and you're like, that was a dope day. You can probably pick apart that day and be like, okay, I maximized my sleep. I made sure that I had some quality time with the people that I love. I spent some time free of distraction to really go in on this purposeful journey that I'm doing on the business side. Like there's just so much about it versus other days where you're just really like reaching for opportunities to disconnect, whether that's alcohol, TV, like whatever that is for the person.
Yeah.
There's just so much that we can glean from someone's day, and we can pick that part apart. And that's what I really love about working with people is like I get to pick apart their day and help them to understand what the roadmap looks like.
What do you find to be different between working with athletes and just, your normal 9 to 5 guys that are, going out running a business or working at wherever? What are some of the differences you find? Is it a mindset
Bro,
thing?
there's
Is it a physical thing? What do you got?
there's so many similarities. That's kind of why like I work with these like athlete entrepreneurs because in order to do both, like you have to have grit.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand like there's almost a level of courage, conscientiousness that is very apparent because day in and day out you're not guaranteed success, but I
Sure.
think that there's an understanding of the process, and I think that's really that mindset shift, Bobby, that I find that helps people to be successful, that maybe they have this long-term goal, but they also understand what the small milestones look like, and they also have an inherent trust and confidence in themselves
Yeah.
even in the face of failure. And I think that piece right there is super evident across the board. Granted, like there's varying levels, like, a guy like yourself that I always say this too, like there's like the pitcher, I mean, catcher has this too, but like I feel like the pitcher, not only is it so taxing on the body, but it's really taxing on the mind.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think that there's a level of tenacity and a level of like I have to win that I think is really great. But at the same time, and maybe you can speak to this, like that part can be hijacked for negativity.
No.
Like you can
Yeah.
get yourself out of that confidence space really quick by merely just shitting on yourself time and time again. And so like if you're asking me what's different, like there are a lot of similarities, but like obviously there's varying levels. But I will say an athlete in sport, um, it's like a different level of negativity than it is in business. Granted, there are some times, but like I would say a guy can get himself out of professional anything fairly quickly because of mindset.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think what sports does is allows you to it prepares you to fail, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Just
It
because in
does.
sports you're not really it's a hard no matter what sport you're playing, you're probably going to lose at some point in your life. And that's probably what I learned most is did I expect to have a Hall of Fame career? Absolutely. That's what I
Yeah.
went out to do and wanted to do my whole entire life. Injuries happen, things happen in life that don't let that happen. And, here we are now. So I guess for
Yeah.
me, it's kind of prepared me in that sense of things don't always go your way, but no matter what, you got to work your ass off for whatever it is. You got to be able to persevere through the hard times and be okay with however the chips fall. Right. And I think that's a big lesson that a lot of people learn during those tough times.
Man, I'm probably taking away our conversation on my podcast, which I'm pissed off about, but we can go ahead and do it again.
Sorry, we'll do it
Um,
again.
I, I like to, even just like for you, the mound, like it's such a metaphor for life because like I'm sure that as you're stepping into this next stage,
Hmm.
like this is your mound, like this is your delivery, like
Sure.
this is what you have to deliver on. So, sport can be a really beautiful metaphor. And I think when you start to look at it as you separate yourself from competing at a high level to now competing at a high level in life, like there's a lot of similarities, man. So I've always really loved that metaphor of, especially when athletes are stepping out of competitive sport into just competitive life.
Hmm.
It's a really beautiful thing to help them to understand where it's like nothing's changed about how you operate. It's
Yeah.
just a different field.
No, for sure. And it's very true. When you're throwing, and we can save this for later, but you're out there on the mountain. It's an island, and you're by yourself
Yeah.
on that island.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot about yourself on it. It's
Yeah.
it's only
Yeah.
you out there, right? I mean, obviously you have your team behind you, and that's a huge part of baseball. But you're the one that is dictating the pace. You're the one that's
Hmm.
throwing the ball. You're the one that's either going to walk the guy, get up the hit, strike him
Yep.
out, whatever. So in that sense, it teaches you a lot about yourself. What
It
kind of
does.
person you are. How are you going to act when things don't go your way? How are you going to act when the umpire throws a ball or calls a ball that's definitely a strike? Um,
Yeah.
how are you going to act when he calls a strike that's definitely a ball? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many different things. The game within the game that you learn, and no, I think that's great, man. And we can save that for a later time. We'll talk about it more, but you're
Love it.
definitely 100% right there. Um, Kind of moving on from your normal person to your athlete now. Um, what are some of the bigger challenges you see for athletes? What
How long we got, bro? Fuck.
as long as you need, brother. Go ahead.
Um, I think it's tapping into a lot of what we've been talking about. I feel like earlier in my career, I really missed the boat of like really holding space for what's going on. Because I think one thing that happened a lot, especially, I worked very intentionally with a lot of our rehab guys, but there was almost like the aesthetics of like how you want to feel and look in your body, I think is something that all athletes are going to struggle with.
Sure.
And I think I would have wished that I would have held space for like, let's say in this case, like why aesthetics were important because like men have body image issues too. And I think that's something that we don't talk about because there's been so many times that a guy was under fueling and it really wasn't like there's some education component, but it was more so about like, well, I want to trim my body fat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in most cases, like we're really doing people a disservice. And I felt like in my career, like there's been moments where I just didn't know what I didn't know at the time. Um, but like if you're performing great, regardless of what your body looks like, it does need to be about like, hey, like what is your goal surrounding like what you're doing in sport? Because I even found this too. Like I went to our sports science guys a couple times and I was like, hey, is there a body fat percentage for a position that like we need to be looking at? Like, what's the science say? And I think what we found is that like with catchers and pitchers, like the guys that had like more body fat were also the ones that were most effective. Like, especially with the pitcher, like
Mm-hmm.
he's be able to create more power, more low, like all that shit,
I
right? And I
I
was like,
I don't want to cut you off here, but it's something
good.
I talked about with a lot of our guys here. The best pitchers I've been around all have some sort of love handle, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah. They
I
got a boot. Like, let's call it what it is.
it is what it is. You know what I mean? And I don't know if there's something from like elasticity standpoint or I don't know, but
Just
it is a
generating
very
more
common
power, bro.
trait.
Like,
It's a very common trait,
yeah,
and I don't know what it
yeah.
is. So if you have anything on that, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Make
because
those
I
make the
think
love
it
handle pitchers feel good, dude. Go ahead.
again, like let's look at velocity, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what's more important to you, throwing 97, 98, or having a 9 to 10% body fat and throwing like 85.
Oh,
Like that
dude.
just kind of goes back to like, yo, like what are you trying to do here?
Uh-huh.
So I can tell you that the guys that are like really in that calorie deficit are also the guys that probably aren't performing very well. They're
Yeah.
probably not on the field. So I think it goes back to like again that one piece is going to be like the body image piece is like really holding space for like okay cool, why are you doing what you're doing? Because at the time keto was a really big thing. I'm glad that it's kind of like taking its form just like most other like crash diets.
Yeah.
But like keto was a really big thing, and like for me it was about helping the guys to understand that like hey, carbohydrates are actually your muscle and your brains, like that's what they want as a fuel source.
Sure.
Yes, fats are fuel source. Yes, proteins are, but like, hey, with what you're trying to do, like you're trying to get your velocity up, like you're actually not doing what you need to be doing here. So I think that's probably the big piece right there. And this is kind of a culmination. This next one that I'm finding is also just like looking to influencers on social media for like what they should be doing
Yeah.
instead of going to accredited individuals that maybe they're not perfect, but I'll tell you what, and I tell this to people all the time, like, look, I don't know everything, and if you ask me a question and I don't know what that is, I guarantee that I can either find the person to talk to who knows the answer or I know where to look.
Right.
And I think that's what makes a really good coach is like knowing their limitations and being okay and being vulnerable with an athlete and be like, you know what, like that's a great question. perplexed. Like, let me go figure that out. I'll
Yeah.
get back to you type of thing. Because I think like going back to the issues that happen, like one thing that I tend to find is like guys are massively underfueling. Like they don't understand how much energy they're outputting and how much
Mm-hmm.
they need to intake.
Right.
And oftentimes they're kind of looking for that like easy fix or that quick fix. And I'm like, listen, this might help you in the interim, like in the short term, but in the long term, again, it goes back to not only do you want to, like in this case, this example, do you want to throw in the high 90s, but even more so, like your best ability is your availability. Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you need to not be injured. That's the biggest thing. You
Right.
need to not be injured. And I think injury in itself is obviously a big issue with athletes, but it does go back to your rituals. What's your relationship with nutrition look like? Your relationship with sleep, your relationship with stress. Like there's all these things that are kind of culminating in one, but like I would say probably those are the top things that I'm finding with guys. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it does go back to like we need to be having conversations with them and holding space for all of their shit and then offering education and making sure that they're working with an accredited individual.
No, 100%. There's a couple points I want to touch on what you just said. First off, the reason I reached out to you, we talked about it a few weeks
Yeah.
ago whenever I did, it was talking to these high school kids, right? Obviously, my goal is to get the best out of them from a performance standpoint. I want them to throw more strikes, throw harder, uh, all the whole thing. And then, I'm looking at them in the weight room, right? And there's really not I don't want to say there's no change because there is, but it's like, okay, hey, let's take the next step. What are you eating in a day? And
Yeah.
some of the answers that I got from some of these kids, I'm like, you're
What?
eating what? You're eating 3 cookies, and then hopefully your mom makes you dinner, or if not, you're going to McDonald's.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing? So people need to hear this and how important nutrition is. And when I say nutrition, I think you would agree to this. It's not necessarily like the keto diet. Don't eat carbs. Don't do this. Don't do that.
Hmm.
Eat something.
Yeah.
Because
Eat.
if we're not fueling and we're under fueling and we're in that constant deficit, um,
Yeah.
performance, injury prevention, all those things are going to suffer at a very high clip.
It really is, dude. I mean, I think like if I were to just like one word to an athlete, if I were just talking to a room and like you had me come in and you're like, hey, I just need you to say one word, it would merely just be like,
Eat,
eat.
eat
Like,
food.
eat.
Yeah.
Uh, because like it kind of goes back to that underfueling piece. Like, you know what? Yes, let's say with these high school students, it definitely could be like there's no planning on board. It definitely could be like more of a familial issue where it's like let's educate the family so that we can help this athlete because this is how
Sure.
this needs to work because the athlete's not buying or cooking their food, which to some extent, like I would really empower the athlete to do so.
Right.
But again, like most people are underfueling for their given sport, and I think when people really start to understand and start to see like those like almost like mental badges, if you will, of like, damn, like I'm getting stronger, I'm getting faster, I'm recovering better. I'm not hating what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
This feels great. Like, what have I been doing? Like, oh shit, I've been eating more. I've been
Mm-hmm.
sleeping. Like, I've been listening to my coaches. Like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, my life seems to be in order here.
Yeah.
Um, that's fantastic. No, I think it's such a huge point. Like I said, eat, please.
Yeah.
Like if you're a high
Just
school kid
eat.
and you're listening to this and you're like, that sounds a lot like me. Go get a
Damn.
Chipotle burrito or something, dude. Go eat
Yeah.
it. You know what I mean?
Go get some calories.
Yeah, exactly. But when we're talking like how do you from a tracking standpoint, a lot of people probably will be like, "Well, how do I know if I'm eating enough?" Or how do I know how many calories I'm
It's a
burning
great
in a day?
question.
What do you recommend for those guys to be able to do that?
Again, like I always touch on foundational things. Most people that I work with, like at first, like they're all go-getters, right? They're like, I want to get better tomorrow, like blah, blah, blah. And sometimes what comes back when I tell them this, and this is kind of how I work with people, where it's like, hey, over the first 30 days, I just want to build some awareness, but really I want you to build some awareness. So
Right.
depending on how advanced you are, like I might have you just take images of your food and I might have you formulate an idea of what a balanced plate looks like, right? So let's maybe say on one day you this is just an example. You have yourself a hamburger. And I'm like, all right, cool. Good day one. Tomorrow, listen, I need you to add some colorful fruits or veggies on there. So half of your plate needs to have that, right? I need to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, I'm like, hey, this was great. Let's bring in a little bit of variety. So maybe instead of the hamburger, what are some other types of proteins that you really enjoy? What are some other types of carbohydrates that you enjoy? So we kind of formulate that together. And what I'll do is I'll start them off with, let's get solid on our breakfast, or really just for them, like, hey, what's the meal that you think that you can do this balanced plate easier?
Sure.
In most cases, it's breakfast. So like, all right, cool. We got breakfast down for week one. Week two, let's get lunch in. Let's make sure that we get that balanced plate down. All right, cool. Week three, let's go ahead and get dinner, and then we can start addressing snacks. But even for someone who's a bit more advanced, and Bobby, you and I encountered this too. Like, all right, cool. Let's utilize my fitness pal in a way where it's like, let's get some metrics behind what we're doing. All right, cool. Week one is done. We need to tweak this a little bit. Your protein goal needs to be here.
Mm-hmm.
It's always good to have fiber. Let's teach you how to do fiber, because if you're doing fiber, this brings in awareness that not only are we eating quality carbohydrates, but we're also getting the fruits and veggies in, because that's going to add to our
Right.
fiber.
Right.
So like there's small little tweaks here and there. And I think it does start off with, I don't care what your awareness tool is, let's bring in some awareness. So if it is taking an image and comparing it to what a balanced plate looks like, and then the next day working towards that balance, there's so much that can happen from there.
Yeah, no doubt. And kind of what we were just talking about, like I thought a really cool tool that we used to to monitor gains. Obviously, not a lot of people have a DEXA scan available ready to them,
Yeah,
but like I
yeah,
think, you know,
that was nice.
it was great because we could do it once
Yeah,
every couple months, once every month. I don't even remember how many we
yeah.
did, but it was like, okay, let's see if this is actually working or not. You know, and there'd be a lot of times where I kind of learned my body through that rehab process just because I knew exactly what I was eating. I knew
Hmm.
exactly how many calories I was burning. I knew, you know, what my weight room schedule looked like pretty much a week in advance, and I can kind of plan around that, right? And then you can
Hmm.
see results on those type of measurables, whether it's a, you know, a caliper or a DEXA scan or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. But like for somebody that doesn't have those type of tools ready for them, is it more of like a, hey, look, I look really good in the mirror, or is it from an overall performance standpoint?
I mean, in this case, like I think the performance piece is great. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can always take a look back and be like, how have I changed? But like you can always take images of yourself and see the differences. Because sometimes like they're not going to be super measurable, but you are going to feel a difference. Like in the case of someone who is looking to gain muscle, you know, if your clothes are fitting differently, if you're thinking to yourself like, damn, I really gotta squeeze my butt into my shorts right now, like, yo, that's a good thing. Like, good
Yeah.
job building that booty.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but yeah, like it goes back to like not only how your clothes are fitting, obviously how you look and how you feel, um, but also in some ways, and you know maybe in a lot of ways, having others comment on your body is probably like not beneficial. But in this case, if you have other people that are like, yo, you're looking stacked, or like, yo, you're looking good, like, all right, cool,
So just
let's
be
do
a good
this.
person and compliment somebody if they look good.
Yeah, just compliment some. Well, first off, like ask them, like, yo, I have a comment about your body. Like, are you cool with this type of thing? But yeah,
You got to ask for that consent to comment on someone's body.
consent to comment.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people like don't, and it's kind of a shitty thing to do as a person. So
Sure, sure. No, I hear you. So kind of talking about diet here, and we talked about it briefly with melatonin, but supplementation. Um, what are some things that you find that guys are very deficient in? Is there like a stack that I know it's like kind of the buzzword nowadays? Like, is there a
yeah,
stack you recommend? Is there anything that is like a pretty common supplement that you're giving people?
yeah. I mean, I would probably just answer this question in the way that I have shown up when I'm a consulting dietitian for like a professional team.
Mm-hmm.
So first, like I want to make sure that everyone has like a baseline foundational level of like this is what it takes in order to actually maximize supplementation. So just going kind of full circle real quick, a supplement, you can't out supplement really bad habits. Like that's the first thing.
Yep.
So if your nutrition is on point and your habits are on point, then we can start talking about these. But I think like my top three that I would look at is obviously omega-3 supplementation. I would look at creatine, and then I would also be looking at probiotics. Like those are probably the three. You know, magnesium is up there that I would look at. So like it kind of like it really depends on the team and the person and what their needs are. But if
Right.
I'm kind of looking at four supplements that I would be like, hey, like these are really great to add in just as a starting block. Those are probably it.
How often are you asking guys to do blood work or anything like that just to kind of see from a like, okay, this is
Yeah.
exactly what we need. You're deficient in vitamin D, C, whatever it may be.
So like there's two, it's a two-pronged approach. So like one is if I'm in a medical center as a provider, as a dietitian, more or less, like if we're looking at a lipid panel, like we're going to take those likely every 6 months, depending on where the person is.
Sure.
If we're taking a basic metabolic panel, like you can certainly take a look at electrolytes and other things like other different types of functions. You can do that monthly if you need to. But with most athletes, like unless we find something and are like, oh shit, we need to monitor this, yearly is fine.
Yeah.
Like, you should be seeing your primary care physician anyway yearly.
Hmm.
So like that's a good opportunity to do it. Granted, if some things come up, then we might need to make some like different interventions and see if the interventions are working. So to your point, it could go anywhere from a year, 6 months if we see something, or maybe even 3 months. There have been times where we're looking at it monthly because we saw some things that were like, yo, this is pretty abnormal. Like, let's take a look.
Hmm.
So it really just depends. But like, I think yearly when you see your doc, that's a good place to start.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, because I just curious in that sense because I know a lot of people. It's kind of a new. I don't want to say fad because I think it is important to get blood work done and see where we're at just from a like you said from a metabolic standpoint. Measure your lipids, all of it. So, um, I just didn't know if that was something y'all were doing with your clients or something that you recommend people doing because I've asked a lot of people, and like, hey, how often do you get your blood work done? And it's like, I don't think I've ever had a blood test in my life.
Yeah, I mean that's a problem. Let's get a blood test in.
Yeah. Kind of going based off of a little bit of this, and maybe I should have brought this up earlier when you mentioned the whole breakfast thing, fasting. That's something I try to convince you on for a little bit there, I believe, and
I know, I
something
know
I,
you
I
did.
still do every now and again. The research that I've read from a like cellular repair standpoint and all that, like obviously I'm just an idiot that thinks I know things and I think I can Google stuff and spit it back out
Yeah.
to people, but I'm not a registered dietitian. So what is your stances on fasting and is if doing so is there a time frame? Is it better to not eat at night, in the morning? What do you think?
So let's address it from an athlete perspective. We'll kind of just start there. And this
Okay.
is also me holding space for the religious reasons to why people fast, right? This is me holding space for uh, how and why an athlete feels good if
Mm-hmm.
they fast. So I think holding space for those things, what I'll oftentimes do is I'll just ask more questions, and it really depends on the individual. So if you're coming into let's say a morning training session followed by a game, you're probably going to want to eat in the morning, right? Your body can only store a certain amount of glycogen in your liver and your muscle, right?
Sure.
Because what happens like when you sleep is that your body taps into like all of your liver glycogen, right? And that's kind of like the tank, if you
Is that
will.
like the
So as you're
repairing
sleeping,
process kind of thing?
that's just part of the process. Like the body is like, okay, well, we're not eating over the next 8 to 9 hours. So like we need energy from somewhere. So they're
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, so the brain is like, yo, go get the calories in the gas tank in the liver because we need that glycogen just to like, I don't know, survive. And so like it'll go in, it'll take all of that. And by the time you wake up, like you're kind of left with your muscle glycogen. And so what I tend to find with guys is like your muscle glycogen is like for like more like fast twitch. I don't want to say fast twitch, but it's more for like training sessions.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you encounter an opportunity where like you have a training session in the morning, like 60 to 90 minutes, you're replenished. You can go ahead and replenish, but your tank that you just took from is still empty. So like throughout the day, like you're in a calorie debt, if you will, in this case, a performance debt.
Right.
So like I'll help guys to understand like the process of that and just really look at like, hey, if you feel like this is a good regimen for you and you're performing, you're recovering, you're not getting injured, okay, let me teach you how to maximize the calorie intake during the hours that you want to
That
eat.
window.
Yeah, but again, this really depends on how the person's performing because in most cases people are doing it incorrectly and they're like creating this like weird window. So by 8 p.m. they're starving, and so like willpower can only do so much. Like the body is meant to eat, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so at some point, like we start looking at binge eating and other things where it's like, hey, like that's like the Bobby, that's the first telltale sign for me where it's like, yeah, like I did a really well first couple of days, but like I'm just having like a mindset issue, and I just crushed Taco Bell last night. And I'm like, all right, like what's crushing look like? And it's like
$40.
six, seven times, like $40.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, cool. You just engage in a binge episode.
Yeah.
Let me teach you about the human psychology of why we eat and what happens if
Right.
you try to neglect your hunger. Because for us, like hunger is one of the most innate physiological signs of I need something, right? When you breathe, like you don't have to think about breathing, it just happens. Hunger is one of those physiological sensations that we actually need to tap into and listen to.
Hmm. No, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's really good stuff. Um, and I think, especially in the day and age that we live in, so many people want to suppress that hunger, right? And you kind of touched on it
Yeah,
earlier, where it's like the whole body image thing, where people look at your favorite Instagram influencer or whatever it may be, and it's like, oh, I have to strive
yeah,
to be that, and we just live in
yeah,
this never-ending hamster wheel of like, okay, I want to look like that, so I don't eat. Well, I'm hungry, and it's
yeah.
it's men
I
and
want to
women.
look
It
like
doesn't
that.
matter who
I
you are.
want to, yeah, yeah.
So it's
Facts.
something that I think definitely needs to be addressed and talked to. Just talk about it. It's something that a lot of people are going through and a very normal thing. So you mentioned replenishing. We just kind
Hmm.
of finished up with the summer here. I don't know how hot it is where you're at, but it's pretty hot here in North Carolina. A lot of
It's
people
hot as
are
fuck. It's Arizona, bro.
there you
Like,
go. Arizona, the worst. So,
yeah,
hydration's a big one that I feel like is
yeah.
very missed with kids. Um, this at every level. I see so many guys, and I want to talk briefly about caffeine intake, energy drinks, because I can't tell
Hmm.
you how many energy drink cans are in our trash can every day with these kids that come in,
Yeah,
and not a lot of water.
yeah.
Even people that I know and are close, like there's not enough water intake. Um, I want you to speak kind of to that. Thoughts throughout the summer, how important hydration can be. Supplementing hydration with some sort of electrolyte.
Hmm.
Just go ahead and speak briefly on that.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways that you can approach it, and it really depends on the person. But when climate is involved like this, hydration needs to be on top of mind. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, we kind of go through it with like a two-pronged approach. So, like, one is, all right, well, we hydrate on a schedule, right? And two is we hydrate to thirst, or we hydrate when we are thirsty. So,
Sure.
with a climate like yours, like I'm looking at both. So if we can make sure, and this is kind of like we talk about these digital badges, like this is a physiological badge. The color of your urine, if it's a light apple juice color, then like you're doing what you need to be doing, congratulations.
Like light apple
Versus if
juice,
it's
not like.
like light apple juice,
Mm-hmm.
like we want like, I used to say lemon lime Gatorade, and then people just got too confused and was like, all right, never mind, I don't
Is
want to use
is
that
is
anymore.
clear too much?
Clear is not enough electrolytes,
Okay.
right? And then obviously if it's dark, then you're like, you need to get your life in order right now. Like you're a struggle busting.
Yeah.
Um, but I think going back to like that's like your biggest badge, if you will, because if your urine is that like very light, kind of like apple juice color, like in that spectrum, then like okay, like I'm doing what I need to do. I'm hydrating the thirst. I'm hydrating on a schedule. Like I'm getting what I need. But
Right.
I think even more so, like this kind of goes back to like the weird influencer bullshit. Like I saw something the other day that was like, look at these electrolyte supplementation like, has added sugar. Like, bro, you need carbohydrates to facilitate what's happening with sodium, potassium in the fucking cells. Like, can we stop with this? That's another soapbox for another
We'll
time.
get
Anyway,
on. Yeah. Yeah.
we'll get there. But again, going back to the climate piece, like you should be having some sort of electrolytes. And even if you're not someone who does, and again, if you're under 18, like we're not even really having discussions about supplements, like not even a little bit,
Yeah.
because you can do the same amount of having a nice bowl of like watermelon or having a nice bowl of, insert any fruit and sprinkle a little salt on there. Or like in a climate like yourself, like you can have a little salt with your meals. You need it.
Yep.
You're sweating.
Right.
So I think it points back to that is helping them to understand like there's definitely a calculation, but like I don't tend like athletes don't they don't want a bunch of numbers. They want tactics. So I feel like going back to like, hey, let's create a schedule,
Right.
right? If you're thirsty, have a water bottle on hand. Let's add in a little bit of electrolytes. And if you're under 18, like it's okay to snack. Let's throw some salt on those snacks.
Yep. What do you got on water quality? You have so many different alkaline waters, pH levels. You're looking at tap waters or filtered water. So many people like, and I fall into this. I drink Essentia and feed. Oh, that's probably just me
It's
being
great,
me.
yo. It's
But
great
what
marketing.
what what is the difference in them? Why should we drink one versus the other? Or is there any difference? Like, does it not matter?
Look, I want to say filtered water would be great if you enjoy it, but I also grew up drinking out of a water hose. Like,
I did too.
listen, like I'm good. like, like you need water, but I think going back to like, I think it's really funny from a marketing perspective because if foods could impact alkalinity in your blood, like you'd be dead. You'd be dead
Is that okay? Why
because
why is that?
your because your lungs and your kidneys regulate your pH essentially. Your
Sure.
kidneys mostly, right?
Right.
They regulate your pH because we're at a constant state of homeostasis, right? Our balance, nothing that we intake is going to really impact that, especially from the standpoint of water. So like I said, it's really great marketing, but the alkalinity of what's inside the water is not going to impact the alkalinity of what's inside the blood because your body is so advanced of knowing how to balance things out that your kidneys do that work for you. So listen, if it gets your water intake in and you're feeling great with it, bro, by all means, do your thing.
Spend the extra $10 or whatever it is.
Yeah, spend the extra $10 if you want.
Yeah.
There's a water hose over there. You're gonna do just fine.
Yeah. That's funny. No, I think that's great for people to hear because it has become such a, again, going back to the whole influencer thing. It's, oh, I have to drink this water because so and so does it. You
Yeah,
know, as long as you're hydrating, I think that's priority one there. Because again, like I
bro.
can't tell you how many people I've talked to in here that just don't hydrate, that need to, especially when you're out playing 4 games a day in the heat.
Yeah, yeah. One of my friends that I met in professional baseball, who's also a sports dietitian, coined this phrase. Tony Castillo, shout out to you, bro. Hydrate or dihydrate. He would just yell that to players as they were like practicing or doing stuff. Like I still like my 7-year-old says it, Daddy, hydrate or dihydrate.
I love it. It's completely accurate.
Yeah,
So kind of going a little bit off, off. I don't want to say off topic, but kind of dealing with water here. Big trend that you're seeing everywhere nowadays is cold tub, right? Ice bath,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
something that I think a lot of athletes have done for years now. I think you go back even to the 1950s when high schools were doing 2 days. The coach would make you go in the cold tub
yeah,
after practice.
yeah.
What is the science behind that? How can that help your mental health? Like we kind of talked
Yeah.
about the breath work, the mindfulness. Is there
Mhm.
any component to that's helping that?
So, like, obviously, it's a really hot topic right now. I'm still wrapping my head around understanding it, not only just from a scientific perspective, but like my experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we know what the science says is like the like rate at which like it's most effective is about 12 minutes a week. So that's like almost 2 minutes a day
Okay.
of like cold immersion. What
How
we also
cold is
know
that?
is so I'm gonna have to look at the actual metric here, but I think it ranged anywhere from 32 to 42. But don't quote me on that. I'm gonna have to look at
Okay.
the actual temp. But it's usually 12 minutes, right, a week. That's like best practice. The other thing that we found out too, it is actually inhibits some of the muscle protein synthesis. So like someone who's doing it constantly and your goal is to maximize your muscle gain, like it's just something to look at, right?
Yeah,
So
that was a question I wanted to ask you. Is that there's a lot of research out there that it affects hypertrophy.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
and
So
that's in
like
the
it's
negative.
not a good thing if you're in a program for hypertrophy, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so again, so there's that piece. Now, to me, and this is what is most interesting to me, having done and really loved cold immersion, it really helps me, and this is obviously purely anecdotal. This really helps me to tap into the moment and my body, which I think can be a really great metaphor for how to encounter stress, how to encounter, uh, conflict in life, and even just from an athlete perspective of like when it's go time, like it helps you to not only engage in your breathing where you're doing much more breathing than mouth breathing. You're taking these deep diaphragmatic breaths. To me, like you just keep going back into the moment. I don't know if you know who Harvey Martin is. So he's the human performance coach of the San Francisco Giants.
Sure.
So he's essentially their breath coach. And I just had him on the podcast and we were talking about like the levels of mindfulness that it takes in order to perform at the highest level. And for him, like his story, and I'm sure you can probably relate to this to some extent, like he, his last pitch for the Brewers was actually like he was just going through a rehab stint and he said he had the yips and his last stint was he was throwing some BP and he actually hit Tuck.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah,
Oh
and no
no.
guys would like go and BP with him. So like that was kind of the start of him like getting out of professional baseball. But I tell you that story because we talked about cold immersion. We talked about like what it does from a mental perspective, and to me, it really helps you to develop your skills because I think it's an empowering moment to understand that everything that you've ever needed has always been inside of you. And I think that piece right there is so important. So when we bring in the cold immersion piece, like yes, they're still understanding the science. A lot of people are probably overdoing it for what they might need. But again, I think what the benefits are that I'm finding, and this is just my experience and what I'm seeing with people that I work with, is that it kind of just reminds you that like you're here, you have power, you
Yeah.
have skills, you can use them.
Without a doubt. And I think the mind is so powerful that a lot of people, and we still don't understand how powerful the mind is. Um,
We're still figuring that out.
right. And it's like you put yourself in that uncomfortable spot of nobody wants to be in cold water. I don't, unless you're Wim
Mm-mm.
Hof, right? Nobody
Yeah,
really,
unless you're like he loves that shit.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
they hike the Andes or some shit like naked
Yeah,
pretty
no,
much. Like
I did
dude,
a lot
like
on
I'm
his.
good.
I'm a big fan of his just from
Same.
a discipline standpoint. Like
Yeah.
it takes a lot to say, okay, I'm gonna take my shirt off. I'm gonna get in my swim trunks and hike, these snow-covered mountains barefoot.
Yeah.
You know,
Like crazy.
um,
I'm good. I'm good. I'm
so yeah,
good.
not a lot of people are wanting to do that, but
I'll
I
stick to my cold bath.
exactly. I'll put some ice in there and call it a day. But I just think from a human performance standpoint, it's incredible what we're able to do that we haven't tapped into. And just that mere fact of like completing that task that you came up and you showed up to do that a lot of people wouldn't is like, hey, I can do this. I can do this thing
Yeah,
called life. I can go take care of this meeting. I can, write this report, or I can go try to throw 9 innings against the Dodgers tonight. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It really doesn't matter what aspect of life you're in. It
yeah.
creates that discipline and something that a lot of people don't realize that they actually have.
100%.
So no, that's
100%.
great, man. Well, Des, I appreciate you joining us, man. I have a ton more
Yeah.
questions that I'm going to ask at a later date. I know we have a seminar coming up
We'll
September
do a
29th.
Q&A then. Like I think that's a perfect time to do that too.
Yeah, for
We'll do it
sure.
kind of
And
like podcast form like this. I think that's where it kind of becomes engaging, where I'm not just like a talking head because
mhm.
I hate that shit.
Yeah, I think most people want to feel, like they're being, I don't know if heard is the right word, but just having a conversation and teaching
Being a
these
part,
kids.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So that's awesome. What I want to end on though, and something that I found was really cool, and you kind of touched on it briefly, is for a lot of people, and listening to one of your guys, I think it was one of your coaches corner maybe or something like that. You talk about how sharing is disarming, and I
mm,
think I don't know if people really fully understand what that means just hearing that quote, but elaborate on that, kind
yeah.
of explain what you mean by sharing is disarming.
Um, I mean, we kind of, and I got this kind of metaphor from Harvey, who I just recently mentioned. Like, we go through life wearing these like masks. We wear the mask of a high level athlete. We wear the mask of a student, of an individual, a family member, a sibling, a husband, like whatever, right? We walk around wearing these different masks, and we take them off in order to kind of put on that facade of like we're here, we're present, and we do the best that we can. And I think what oftentimes happens is that this image of essentially you being okay in a lot of ways gets put out, and it becomes a shield to people. And I think when you can be vulnerable, and I think when you can share, let's talk to the athlete real quick. When you can share that you're really excited about an opportunity, or you can share that you're really fearful about an opportunity, like that in itself is disarming. Like you no longer have the nod of like you have to hide this, but rather like you can actually show up authentically. And I think when people can disarm, they can show up authentically. And what we know about authenticity is that it creates confidence. What we know about confidence is that it creates bigger opportunities for you to maximize your potential. And so
Sure.
when I say sharing is disarming, really what I'm saying is that we're disarming this like idea of what you feel like you should be, and we're releasing an opportunity for you to be authentic. And I think we all know this, like we have authentic relationships, authentic friendships, like those are the ones that you go back to versus the fake ones. And I
Right.
think it's a really good metaphor into what helps you to maximize your performance. In most ways, it's the vulnerability of who you are as a person.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, like I said, I have a ton more questions for you. I think we're gonna have to do it at a later date. But I want you to tell people where they can find you, where you can be heard,
Yeah.
and where they can seek your advice on a lot of these things.
Yeah. I mean, I try to show up everywhere, but I think probably the main places you can find me is at Dezi Abeda on IG. Hit that link in bio, and you can see everything that I'm doing. Another project that I'm obviously really passionate about is the Can't Believe I Made It podcast, where we're tapping into their habits and rituals of high-level athlete entrepreneurs and helping to understand their hero's journey to help you. So I think those are the big two places right now. And then obviously I'll be doing a seminar with you here pretty soon, man. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Like I said, the first thing I told everybody is like, you're gonna be there. Like I don't care what you're gonna find
Be
a way to
there.
be there because you need to hear a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So Des, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to continue our relationship, man, and helping these
Same,
kids and
bro.
helping everybody that just wants to maximize their performance and whatever it is.
Yeah. Have me on.
Awesome. Thank you, Des. I appreciate you, brother.